Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of Everything Kratom, the podcast about anything and everything Kratom. Great to have you with us on this Friday morning, hoping all is well with you. Today I'm going to be talking about addiction versus dependence, drug versus medicine, and of course, all of this under the umbrella of Kratom. And this is kind of spurred by two different listeners reaching out to me in the past couple of days. One of them has been listening for a while now, and one of them just started the other day. One of them uses Kratom and has for a while, and one of them is starting today. So I just think that it's so neat and important to have these different perspectives, and I'm excited to talk about this stuff with you all today. So let's get into it. So first things first, we're going to listen to this very short voice message left by Dan, and then we'll jump off from there.
Hey there, this is Dan. I made a comment on one of your YouTube podcast episodes recently, and you gave me a little bit of an invite to share some information with you about my journey with the Kratom. So I was a struggling alcoholic. Basically 2 years during the pandemic of near constant alcohol use, drinking 9 to 5, 24/7 basically. Sort of got into recovery for a while, and then I was going in and out of periods of soberness with periods of near-death drinking episodes, and I decided enough was enough about 10 days ago. So done some research, looked you up, got some info, and today is day one of the Kratom, and so far so good. I'll let you know some more as things go. So yeah, I took my first dose about an hour ago, and there's an overwhelming sense of calm, sort of like a mild buzzy high, but I still feel myself. It's rather nice. This is rather pleasant. I can see this being useful down the road. The rubber's going to meet the road, probably the first Friday or Saturday when I get the real desire to drink. But I feel very, very calm. Happy, excited, and I've got an overwhelming sense of just listening to some nice music and exercising, which is good. It's nice and positive. So yeah, let's see how this one goes.
Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing that with us, and also for keying us into this first part of your journey with doing something about your take on your struggle with alcohol, and also just the beginning of trying Kratom. And as always, I always make the point of saying I never tell anyone to try Kratom, and I never tell anyone to use it in any specific way. I'm more just talking about my experiences and then like what I think about it. And I just always try to be clear that I'm never recommending anything to anyone. But having said that, I think that it's really neat that Dan is trying out Kratom, and that I'm really glad that this podcast is one resource that he's using, which is great. I'm really happy about that. So thank you so much, Dan. And yes, please keep us in the loop with your journey here, and we'd love to see how it goes. So please do keep sharing, and thanks again. Now, very related to this, I received an email from another listener who has written in the past, and it's anonymous enough, I think. They go by Gigi. So touching on another email from Gigi, they really brought up some interesting points in this email. I'm not going to read through the email or, try to bring up any personal aspects of this person's life here, but basically, the email talks a lot about certain circumstances in this person's life that are related to the episode I did earlier this week on what my family and friends think about my Kratom use, as well as other people in general, and also the more focused, thought-provoking question of, is it right to I always have these disclaimers on this podcast and say, like, I am trying to take the middle of the road, right? I personally think that Kratom is more of a good thing than a bad thing, but I also don't want to be blind to information that might point to otherwise, and it's important to just be the middle of the road, right? So I'm always saying that. But even though that might be a good practice, does it make sense to do that if it isn't rational? And to really dig into this further, which I'll do in a minute, but to kind of pose that another way, if there is almost like a hypocritical way of looking at something that causes me to be very cautious about how I approach talking about Kratom, because I don't want to lean too heavily towards being pro-Kratom, does that take away from the reality? Like, if there's a certain amount of information out there and overwhelmingly it points one way, let's say, is it really just doing a disservice by trying to just take the middle of the road for the sake of taking the middle of the road? Like, is that not viewing Kratom for what it actually is? And when it comes to addiction and dependence, and then is it a medicine or a drug? So I don't know. I really, really love this email that they sent along. I also really enjoyed hearing some updates from their own personal life. So thank you again, Gigi. You rock. And I really appreciate your sharing all these updates going on with you. So let's dig into this, and I'll reference certain points in the email that are relevant just to let you all know where some of these thoughts are coming from. So let's go. I think it's fairly well known at this point amongst people who are cued into anything happening with regards to Kratom that it is viewed differently than a lot of other things that maybe it shouldn't be viewed differently from. And Kratom is kind of part of a very large debate going on right now. We're living through a very difficult time when it comes to the opioid epidemic. And I don't think there's much a doubt about that. It's everywhere, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And at the same time that this is happening, you also have Kratom becoming more well-known, and it's often likened to the opioids that people are addicted to, and which have become a huge focus of national debate, policy, healthcare, how the criminal justice system works, wellness, and anything and everything in between. So you have all of this context, and in my mind, that's kind of how I approach thinking about this, is it's not happening in a vacuum. As the use of a certain type of plant material rises, the social circumstances and, where society's at that moment in time, it's going to influence it, and how it's seen and how it's used, maybe, and how it's dealt with, and what the perception is of people using it. So this is all the context that I see as relevant here. And yet, even though looking at how Kratom is used and how it should be viewed, it isn't happening within a vacuum, it still is important to understand the fundamental truth. If you are using Kratom every single day for a certain reason, and it has no ill consequences, and there's nothing bad happening to anyone else as a result of your using it, and basically everything is fine, is that dependence or addiction, or does it even really need a label? And why are we focusing on Kratom when we're not focusing on something else that people might use every day? This kind of gets to the crux of it all. And it made me open a dictionary. Looking at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, addiction is said to be a compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for a habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects, and typically causing well-defined symptoms upon withdrawal, such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, or nausea. So based on that definition of addiction, I don't know if it's really necessary to use that word when it comes to Kratom, unless when you stop taking it, you do notice having well-defined withdrawal symptoms. However, that's only part of the definition, because part of it is also, while you're taking it, it's having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects. And so if you're taking Kratom daily and it's not having any of those harmful effects on you, and if you stop taking it and you don't have well-defined withdrawal symptoms, it's not addiction. And let's just call it for what it is. It's not addiction, if that's the case. If, however, you do experience withdrawal symptoms, then maybe that's making the case for it's somewhat of an addiction. And that's a debate that should be had. Now, when it comes to the word dependence, because a lot of the time, the other half of this is dependence. People say, well, it's not addictive. Maybe people are dependent on it. So let's look. Dependence. The quality or state of being dependent, especially the quality or state of being influenced or determined by or subject to another. It references the word dependent, and then looking at that, dependent says determined or conditioned by another. So I kind of view dependency in a new way after reading the actual dictionary definition of what it means to be dependent on something. It's fairly open-ended, and I don't know if it's necessarily the right way to go about things when it comes to Kratom, defaulting to the idea that people can be dependent on it. Because it's such an open-ended question, and there are so many other things people are dependent on. If you took away coffee, we wouldn't even have had the first industrial revolution. I mean, let's get real here. I think society was dependent on caffeine if it was going to make this launch into a mechanical-oriented society. And then looking at the individual level, I think it's pretty clear that pretty much, every other person and their cousin is dependent on caffeine these days. It's just ingrained in the culture. But being ingrained in the culture versus not being ingrained in the culture should not dictate how something is viewed in terms of if it's inherently a good or bad thing to use it every day. So if we're looking at the first definitions here of addiction and dependence, this has kind of made me less apt to use the word dependence when it comes to Kratom. I think it is somewhat kind of like a given that people are dependent on things every day. And I think that if you're trying to differentiate something being something that you're dependent on versus an addiction, then it's not really worth branding Kratom as something someone can be dependent on and making that the brand for a positive argument for Kratom, because that's something that you can say about other things as well that I think might even be more harmful than Kratom. So I don't like the word dependence anymore. This kind of brings us into the aspect of medicine versus drug. So stick with me for a moment. I'll be right back and we'll dive into that.
Hey everyone, if you want to make your own podcast but you don't know where to begin, Spotify for Podcasters makes it super easy. They've got everything in one place, it's totally free, and you can make money while doing it. Here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start doing it today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and pretty much everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also supported, and you can even conduct polls and Q&As. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, the platform is totally free. No catch, totally free. When I wanted to start my own podcast, I did not know where to begin, and I didn't think it was even possible. And Spotify for Podcasters made it happen. They made it easy, they made it quick, and I am doing something that I love. What more can I ask for? So if you're interested in starting your own show, you can do it, and I highly recommend you give this a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Okay, so medicine versus drug. I really liked this part of the email from Gigi as well. They shared that their partner and them both have experience with chronic illness. They both have chronic illnesses, and that the fact that they rely on certain medications it is, just because that it's prescribed by Big Pharma, it's considered medicine and it's okay. But, having Kratom every day to help with similar issues or different ones, it's not endorsed by Big Pharma, and so that's bad. And why is that okay? They also mention how terrible it would be if they just stopped taking their medications that they're prescribed for their chronic illnesses, and even some of the bad things that happen with their medications that they are prescribed while taking them. This is something that I relate to not through personal experience, but through my brother. He was prescribed Zoloft, and it helped him very much with his depression and his manic bipolar disorder. And the thing that kept happening, though, over the course of years and years, was that he would stop taking the medication because he felt like he was in a good enough place and everything was fine and he has control over himself and he doesn't need it anymore. And he would stop taking it and then things would go downhill. I mean, really downhill. And it's quite likely that that is one of the main contributors to why he took his own life last year. He had stopped taking it a few weeks earlier because he didn't think he needed it anymore. So I would make the argument that that is a very, very strong dependence on a medication prescribed and approved by the FDA and Big Pharma. But the weird thing is that there wasn't the stigma around that. I mean, there is a stigma to an extent that I think maybe he experienced when it came to needing some sort of antidepressant, but it's not the same as someone using Kratom every day. He's taking a pill every day that's literally determining if he's going to be able to function, quote unquote, normally or not, or if he's going to have a crazy manic day, mood swings, depression, and do something really dumb, right? And that is that's a pill standing in the way of a huge change in one's life circumstances, and it's just a pill. So the stigma around that, I feel like, should be, matching the stigma around Kratom use every day, if not like a very more intense and direct stigma. I don't like the idea of people having a stigma around medications that they need to function normally, obviously. I mean, it was my brother, so I'm not saying that there should be, but I'm just saying that if someone's taking 2.5-3 grams of Kratom every single day, and it's allowing them to lead a similar, normal, quote unquote, life that my brother was seeking every day, why is that little 3 grams of Kratom standing in the way of a completely terrible time so much worse than that pill that was approved by Big Pharma? This leads into the second aspect of the definitions: medicine versus drug. Let's go to our friend Merriam-Webster dictionary here. A medicine, a substance or preparation used in treating disease, something that affects well-being. So then let's go to drug, a substance used as a medication or in the preparation of medication. That's pretty funny. If you actually scroll down, you find a better one, I think. There are a couple others that are similar, a substance intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. And then you get to the third one, a substance other than food, intended to affect the structure or function of the body. Bingo. Let's go with that one. So basically, we're talking about something that is not food, that is meant to affect how our body works, basically, versus something that is not food, that is used to treat disease. Now, I think that those two things are the exact same thing, except the only difference is that the one that's not food, that's used to treat disease, has been approved by somebody, and that somebody approved it for a specific purpose of treating something. And that's it. So drug and medicine are both the same. It's just medicine is something that a group of, people through the FDA, let's say, when we're talking about the US, came together and said, looking at the studies and the company that created this drug, we are formally approving the idea that this is good and it helps treat this disease, and so it is now a medicine. Do 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 do. And that's it. That's the ball game. So basically, this all comes back to the question of why is Kratom looked at differently? And I think that it really does come down just the fact that like the more studies, the better, right? And like I mentioned yesterday, NIDA is conducting a nationwide remote study that people can take part in if they use Kratom daily. And I'm hoping that that's a good study. I need to look more into what it's going to be asking about, but I'm excited to see what comes of it. But essentially, there needs to be more research about what Kratom's good for and what it might be bad for and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, there's a huge, huge swath of people the millions of people. There are millions of people who are using Kratom semi to very regularly for some specific purpose. And the FDA has not approved it for any specific purpose because they haven't wanted to begin with. So that's where the stigma comes from. It's just that the FDA as an agency did not want to potentially approve this since the beginning. And so therefore, there will be a stigma and it will be considered a drug, not a medicine. But that's it. It all comes down to that. I mean, getting back to the matter at hand, Kratom is a medicine in any sense that other drugs are considered medicines. I mean, people use it for a specific purpose in their life and it helps them. And if it doesn't cause any really bad things to happen to them while they're using it, and when they stop using it, they don't have an incredible, horrific withdrawal from it, then it's a medicine. And if you're dependent or not on it, shouldn't matter. That's not even part of the argument. Because people are dependent on everything that's approved, everything that's not approved. People are dependent on things. I think that's where it all falls down. And Kratom should be talked about more as something that is on par with some sort of medication approved by the FDA. Now, that's not me saying that it should be seen on par with like a cancer treating therapy or medication or something that actually prevents like a specific disease. Like there are medications that do those things that are very comprehensive and like, you know, the amount of work and effort going into those to make sure that they really do the right thing. You can't just say this treats cancer and I found this plant and it treats cancer. Like there needs to be some more work put into it. At the same time, if you're trying to say, no, Kratom can't help people with anxiety, but Xanax can. I'm sorry, but like Kratom has every right to be used the same way as Xanax, in my opinion. And also, in my opinion, I think people get addicted to Xanax a lot more than they might with Kratom. And I could have gone down that road myself once when I was first prescribed Xanax, but I realized what it was right away and I stopped taking it. Versus Kratom, I still haven't hit any red flags. So stigma, stigma, stigma. But I think that it really all does come down to who society trusts with determining if something can be used for a specific reason, and what those people who are trusted say about something. In this case, Kratom. And so far, they haven't been willing to even look at it. However, the World Health Organization, with the top scientists on addiction from around the world, have come together and said it's not something that they're worried about, at least in the near term. And so that should mean that Kratom should be considered as medicine. That's kind of my take on it. I think the takeaway I'm taking from this personally is that I need to, while being middle of the road, because I do think that it's valuable, I need to be realistic. It doesn't make sense for me to be too careful when there isn't much of a reason to be. I'm still never going to recommend anyone take Kratom. That's my personal preference when I'm doing this podcast. I don't want to be responsible for anybody doing something that they shouldn't do, and so I'll never recommend anyone do this. But I do think that I should be more open about my opinions and not try to block them out simply because I want to take a middle of the road opinion when the middle of the road opinion isn't necessarily correct. So that's where I'll leave this episode today. It was a long one, so those of you still listening, thanks so much for tuning in all the way through. And we'll be back on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Have a great one. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.